Bigfoot? Is it real or is it a hoax?
For ages, he has hidden in the forest, eluded hunters, baffled scientists, and remain a mystery.
My entire life I've seen shadow people.
For powerful and effective constipation relief.
Hello and welcome to the Don't Break the Oath podcast. Please subscribe if you can, if you haven't already. Leave an iTunes review if possible, that would really help us out. Right, so today is an interview with Ken Gerhard. Now, some of you may already be aware of Ken if you've watched things like Missing in Alaska, or if you're into cryptozoology. He's done a plethora of books on the subject, from Mothman to everything pretty much cryptozoology wise. So if you haven't already checked out that Missing in Alaska, it's definitely worth a watch. It was on the History Channel, but I enjoyed it, so it's definitely worth a watch, I'd say. I have to say a big thank you to Ken, actually, because I sat down to do the interview and everything, the mixer for whatever reason just wouldn't work. The day before it was working fine, sat down and all of a sudden it didn't work. So brilliant. But he stuck it out. He could have told me to fuck off at any time because it's probably 15 minutes pissing about. But no, he sat there and he doing the old testing and all that shit. So big kudos to him. Thank you very much for sticking that out. And he is one of my favourite guys in the cryptozoology field. So yeah, it was a pleasure to speak to him. Now I'm going to have him back on again because obviously, like I say, there was a few technical issues that during that interview, so it made it difficult, but we'll have to speak to him again at some point. But I hope you enjoyed today's show. That being said, I hope you had a great Christmas. Ours went pretty smooth and pretty good. A couple of bottles of rum in there. So, and obviously it is New Year's Eve today, so Happy New Year. And it hasn't even started yet. And I've already been reading messages about how Nostradamus predicted the end of the world in 2018. So we've got that to look forward to. But that happens every year, apparently, doesn't it? So we all know that. Anyway, I'm rambling. So here is the interview with Ken Gerhard. I hope you enjoy it. And like I say, if you get a chance, check us out on Facebook. It is just type Don't Break the Oath podcast. I think it's Paranormal Hangout. But if you just type Don't Break the Oath podcast into Facebook, you will find us. Come and say hello. We are available there if you want to PM us, if you've got a story or whatever, or general question. We are there. So without further ado, give you Ken Gerhard. I suppose I first wanted to ask you how you got into cryptozoology, because it's a really strange subject for those looking in from the outside.
Yeah, there's not many of us, I guess, fully committed to this endeavor. But people ask me it a lot. It wasn't a planned career path. It was just something that I've been passionate about my whole life. When I was a young boy, I remember watching a television show about Bigfoot, and I was captivated. And so I went down to the library and read every book I could get my hands on, learned about, of course, Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, the Yeti. Those were kind of the prevalent cryptids or mystery creatures at that time. And through the years, I've just been very interested in the subject. And as I got older, I had some opportunities to work with other people that were doing field research here in Texas where I live. And ultimately, I began to experience things that I just couldn't explain. And I was just kind of drawn in to the point where it kind of took over my life. And now it's a full-time passion / project.
Yeah. So then, strange events, were they more paranormal then?
Well, no. I didn't interpret them that way. What I mean to say is that, for example, I was with a group and we were investigating evidence of Bigfoot or Sasquatch in the woods of East Texas, and began to hear vocalizations, sounds that I couldn't attribute to any known animal. They sounded very much like a primate. Began to find tracks or footprints that looked similar to the ones that are reported, around the continent and the world, and also found other evidence, including these strange teepee-like structures in the woods that looked like they had been put together by something intelligent, but not man-made. They were more like animal nests or primate nests, really. So just kind of a culmination of that. Also some mutilated animal carcasses. So if you when you start going into areas where there are a lot of sightings and you find kind of weird evidence that you can't attribute to any known species, and that's pretty significant.
Absolutely. So, I suppose, like, you are a prolific writer in all this as well. So, you've covered most, cryptids. I mean, no, you mentioned Loch Ness at the beginning there. I mean, is that something you still believe in? I mean, because I'm like you, I got into it, like, I opened the book on Loch Ness and all that, and that got me into it. But obviously left Loch Ness and that mermaids, that kind of stuff. I've left that kind of behind and moved on to, like you say, the Bigfoot and that kind of stuff. I mean, is that the same for you, or do you still hold a little soft spot for the old Loch Ness?
Oh, I absolutely do. One of the epiphanies of my life when I was growing up is that I vacationed at Loch Ness when I was 15 years old. My family traveled over to Europe, and that was one of the spots where I stayed for about a week. And I guess that was my first attempt at field research, because I was interviewing a lot of the locals and people who claimed to have seen it and seen something. And I had a little 8mm movie camera that I carried along with me. I was always hoping to get that, famous groundbreaking footage, which I didn't. But yes, I'm absolutely fascinated with the Loch Ness Monster still. I think the main thing to consider is the big picture, which is that things like Nessie have been reported in similar lakes all over the world, in Canada, Ireland, Russia, Iceland, Japan, even in Argentina, in some of these cold glacial lakes. And the physical descriptions of these mystery animals, these cryptids, are quite similar from place to place. And those also match very well, of course, with the enduring stories and legends of so-called sea serpents, which, date back centuries. So I think all of that taken, in its entirety is a pretty strong indicator that there are some large, unknown aquatic animals out there. And I think that those animals might be responsible for the sightings of Nessie. Now, whether Nessie is a full-time inhabitant of the lake, I think that from a biological point of view, I think that's the problematic thing, since there are so many visitors to the loch each year, so many cameras trained on the loch, and of course, people have also discussed the issues in terms of food supplies, fish stocks and things like that. So perhaps whatever is being seen is something that's traveling back and forth to Loch Ness and other lakes from the ocean. That's what I think might be happening. Yeah.
Well, I was talking to Andy McGrath last week about the Loch Ness Monster, and I mentioned that there's been a couple of reports of people seeing it actually on land.
Yeah.
I mean, have you heard anything like that elsewhere?
Oh, you mean with regard to some of the other lake monsters?
Yeah, actually, like, walking from one lake to the other, or, that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I know with regard to Champ, or the Lake Champlain monster here in the northeastern United States, there's a researcher named Dennis Hall who claims that he saw Champ kind of on the shore, and that's what kind of got him involved in doing research years ago. Other than that, I'm not really thinking of, or I'm not really recalling too many sightings. I think with regard to Russia, I think Lake Lebinkir, I think, where they've had sightings. I think there were some scientists that were doing an investigation. It's a very remote lake. It's kind of in Siberia back in the 70s or 80s, and they claimed that they saw this thing on the shore in the shallows. But, by and large, really not too many sightings. And I know with regard to Nessie, I mean, most of the land sightings are kind of old, aren't they? They date back to the 1930s and such. There's a famous one from the 1950s, but not so many in modern times, as far as I'm aware. So I guess that is problematic when you consider that these things are not seen on land very often. So that would certainly limit their mobility if that's the case.
Yeah. I mean, the land thing just gives the creature another dimension to me, but that's why I'm interested in it. But let's look at some of the the more outlandish cryptids then, because there's a few that get, they sort of spring up and then die down, and some, there's mistaken identity, all this kind of stuff. And a lot of these, the skeptics will say it's mistaken identity, that kind of stuff, but obviously a lot of these cases are not that, especially when you've got trained people looking at, these creatures and saying, this is not what I saw. But the Chupacabra, I know you've looked into this, and obviously now, if you mention Chupacabra to anybody, they're going to say it's a mangy coyote. But the initial descriptions of this beast, sorry, the initial descriptions of this beast don't sound anything like a coyote. So, I mean, where do you stand on the Chupacabra nowadays?
Well, Chupacabra, like many other cryptids, I think tends to be a situation where you have what we call composite identity. That means essentially there are several different animals or things that are involved, and perhaps, I'm not saying that there are a variety of mystery beasts that look like the Chupacabra, because that would be hard enough to accept. But for example, with regard to the original descriptions of the Chupacabra from Puerto Rico in the 1990s, people described this kind of small bipedal kangaroo-shaped animal with kind of a reptilian appearance and, a row of spikes going down its back, large eyes, and so forth. But as the sightings continued and proliferated throughout Central and South America and Mexico, then people began to describe something that had wings that was called a Chupacabra, kind of a bat-like creature. And then, as you mentioned, here in the States, we began to find evidence of these strange canid-like animals that, we actually have pretty strong evidence that they are just weird-looking canids, and those were called Chupacabras. So it's kind of it's a name, I guess, that's been attached to a lot of different phenomenon. I guess that's what I'm trying to say, or used in a lot of different ways. The name Chupacabra is kind of when you head south of the border here in Texas, it kind of becomes a catch-all phrase for basically monster or boogeyman type things. So
like demon.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. It's just kind of but where I stand these days, there's actually there's very little evidence that there is a vampire-like predator, stalking the farms and ranches and drinking the blood of its victims. Very little evidence of that. Some allegations, but that's about it. But with regard to these strange, you call them mangy coyotes, but I think we can go a step further and say that we definitely have these hairless canids. They're not all coyotes. Some of them have turned out to be wolf coyote hybrids or domestic dog coyote hybrids or hybrids of different kinds, but they are canids, but they're essentially hairless, and they have many of them have had strange teeth or dentition, growths on their body, sort of disproportionate limbs and other physical abnormalities. So, I mean, can that really all be attributed to mange? I'm currently working with a scientist in Switzerland who's been taking DNA samples from so-called chupacabras or similar animals from the Ukraine, and he's come to some amazing finds in terms of finding that the DNA samples from hairs and things don't really match up with anything known in the canid world, that they are very distinct and different from wolves and coyotes. So that, in conjunction with the physical abnormalities that I've seen, at least indicates that we might have a very unusual, I guess you could call it a mutation, something that's springing up with some of these feral dog populations around the world. And, I wonder if it might not be attributed to environmental factors, things like pollution and so forth.
Yeah. It's possible. I mean, if we see them running around with 3 eyes, we'll know for sure, won't we?
Yeah.
So, okay, so another cryptid that you've spent a lot of time on, and this is one that don't get talked about nearly enough, is the flying cryptids.
Yeah.
And I mean, these go way back to like the Thunderbird, that kind of stuff. I mean, is that something what you people are seeing today, do you think this is still the same creature that we was talking about back then, or do you think we're looking at 2 or 3 different types of creature here?
No, I absolutely think there is mounting evidence that there is at least one type of large, unknown flying animal out there, and it most certainly is the same thing that Native Americans talked about in terms of the Thunderbird. The Thunderbird legend is a prevalent legend throughout Native America cultures. It spans from the Pacific Northwest to the American Southwest, the Great Plains, the New England, and pretty much everywhere. So you have these totems and that depict these giant birds on the top, and then you have the native legends. But what's really interesting is, are the modern eyewitness sightings, and because of the fact that I've focused on reports of flying cryptids, I've kind of become a lightning rod for those types of reports, and I'm contacted on a fairly frequent basis by people who are adamant that they've seen something unknown, something very large. I guess the challenging thing as a researcher is that the physical descriptions don't always line up. For example, there are many people who describe these things as looking essentially like giant birds with feathers, sort of like a giant vulture or an eagle, a raptor type of bird with a hooked beak, very powerful. And then other people have described these things as looking like something entirely different, basically winged animals that don't have any feathers and have kind of leathery or scaly skin. And those descriptions line up very well with the prehistoric flying reptiles known as pterosaurs, which presumably went extinct 65 million years ago. But many people I've interviewed are adamant that that's what they've seen, or that's what they think they've seen. So that's kind of a really startling part of that mystery. And then kind of on the fringe of that phenomenon, you have sightings of the so-called Mothman and other flying humanoids, which don't sound like anything physical or natural in origin. And those accounts, even though people are describing large winged creatures, really seem to indicate something more supernatural, something less physical in nature.
So supernatural, yeah. I mean, I know because like the Mothman, when that gets brought up, a lot of people go to Alien for that. I mean, where do you stand on that kind of speculation?
Well, I wrote a book, Encounters with Flying Humanoids, Mothman, Man-Birds, Gargoyles, and Other Winged Beasts, where I dedicated, well, first of all, there was a kind of a global look at the Mothman / flying humanoid phenomenon. And, the physical descriptions of these creatures, which are not in any way consistent. You have different physical descriptions from around the world. The common denominator being sort of a humanoid-shaped form with wings attached, for the most part. And of course, that description really does not have any basis in science, in zoology, in the fossil history. In evolutionary terms, you can't have a humanoid with wings. That evolution did not happen that way. And then there are these other strange aspects to that mystery as well. With regard to Mothman, many people describe the Mothman as traveling at impossible speeds without flapping its wings, having large glowing eyes that would put people in sort of a hypnotic trance. Many people who have sighted flying humanoids or encountered them have post-traumatic situations. Some have even experienced illness and even poltergeist activity, hearing strange sounds, smelling strange things. And then you have the whole Men in Black element, where people claim that they've been visited and threatened by mysterious non-human beings. So, I mean, it's a multifaceted, it's a fascinating mystery, and it's multifaceted. But it doesn't indicate any type of flesh and blood living animal. It seems to be something that's more spectral in nature.
So these creatures, again, they pop up all over the world. This is not just, an American thing or European thing. It's it's an Asian thing. It's all over the world. So does that give it more credence, or does that almost put it into this could be the imagination of man because it crops up all these places, or do you think because it crops up all these places that gives it more credibility?
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? I mean, you could look at it two completely different ways. It's a very polarizing possibility. Either these things are real and they exist and it's a valid phenomenon that humans all over the world are experiencing and have been experiencing for hundreds and thousands of years, or there's something about the commonality of humans, something that we share, kind of a global consciousness, and that we have, as humans, we have shared perceptions and perspectives at times, and that this notion of a flying humanoid or a winged man or winged humanoid is such powerful imagery that it's something that we humans share globally, and something that we've incorporated into our mythos and our legends and folklore and so forth.
Do you think that, because it's, almost conjured up by people like a tulpa, do you think, that's possible?
No, certainly.
Well, it's just that these sightings, tend to have like a little short period of time, don't they? They sort of happen for a few weeks or so and then stop all of a sudden.
That's true.
Sorry?
Oh, is our call still going there, Lee? It looks like it dropped on my end.
Yeah, I think it's still going, yep.
Oh, okay. My bad. Don't think you can edit that out, sorry. One of my good friends and colleagues, Nick Redfern, who's written a number of excellent books on unexplained phenomenon, he's a huge proponent of the tulpa theory, and I'm sure your listeners or many of your listeners are familiar with that, but the concept that we are able to, and this stems from a Buddhist belief, Buddhist monks living in remote monasteries, very spiritual men, that claim that they could actually create physical sentient beings with the power of their mind, essentially projecting these beings from their imagination into our physical world, simply with the power of meditation in the mind. And you hit a key point there, and so has Nick, in terms of speculating that maybe our minds are more powerful than we ever imagined, that we are able to essentially, when we start talking about these things like the Mothman or envisioning them and then talking about them, that it kind of breathes life into them, and that they do become so physical creatures or physical things, at least for a short time. And the point you make is excellent, that that would explain why they have very short lifespans in terms of when they're around and so forth. I think that could potentially explain all manner of mystery creatures that don't fit into the natural world, and that could include the flying humanoids. It could include the so-called dogman or werewolves, mermaids, and all types of kind of man-beast hybrids.
Absolutely. You brought up Dogman there. I mean, a lot of reports of the Dogman seem to have some sort of supernatural element, although the creature itself seems to be, in general, physical. What do you make of that?
Yeah, it's very similar. It almost parallels the Mothman and the flying humanoid accounts in many ways. Admittedly, Dogman is not a strong area of my research, but I, of course, correspond with Linda Godfrey, who's a researcher and writer here in the United States, and she's documented so many accounts. And yes, many of them seem to take on a very macabre and almost paranormal element in terms of these are physical creatures, as you indicate, but there are other related phenomenon, things that people experience in conjunction with these dogman creatures, and some of it, again, poltergeist activity, almost like a residual haunting type stuff. strange green shrouded mists that move around, glowing orbs and lights that kind of bounce around, things like that. The glowing eyes, which are often reported on many of these creatures, which is not really, we're not talking about light being reflected. We're talking about self-illuminating red eyes, which is not something that you really find in nature, at least not in vertebrates. So, it's weird.
Just the point on the eyes. I mean, from an evolutionary standpoint and all the rest of it, for a predator to have glowing red eyes doesn't really make a lot of sense, does it?
No, you'd kind of be alerting your potential victims to the fact that you're around.
It's like a sign saying, "I'm here."
Yeah, unless like the Mothman, you're able to maybe hypnotize or put people in put victims in a trance, which that's just it's inconceivable. It's really weird, and there's a certain percentage of Bigfoot accounts also that where you get those kind of weird glowing eyes accounts and orbs and things like that. But as I often point out to people, the percentage of Bigfoot reports that include that stuff is very, very minuscule. So almost not worth considering. But with regard to Dogman and flying humanoids, and Dogman in particular, I think is a fine tulpa candidate when you consider how Dogman seemingly came out of nowhere in recent years, and now they're being sighted all over not only North America, but I'm getting sightings from South America and Europe and Australia as well. And so it seems to be something that's, once it entered the public consciousness, it just started appearing everywhere.
Which gives it that tulpamancy sort of aspect again. But there's a couple of theories that I've got for that, and one of them is that, like you just say, the more people that talk about it, and the more people that have seen it talk about it, because of the ridicule factor, and that. So that could be one aspect. Then you've got the deforestation. As we encroach on their territory, we, are more likely to bump into them. And then you've got the third theory, if you like, which is the one that says, and I don't know where you stand on this, and this is just a far-fetched theory, but there's a theory that the government know about Bigfoot and they're actively seeking and killing Bigfoot. But if you're removing Bigfoot and he's keeping the numbers of dogmen down, then obviously you're going to get an explosion of dogmen by doing that. So it's a rule of unintended consequences, I guess. But, which of those do you think's more likely, if any?
Well, again, I'd say the tulpa theory, and the reason I bring it up is because, again, I don't view Dogman as a evolutionarily viable species.
No.
There's canids and all carnivores, and the lineage that primates evolved from. We diverged from a common ancestor like 50 million years ago, but those were two paths that were radically different. Carnivores and canids obviously evolved into a very specific niche as quadrupeds and as predators, and then primates, of course, we went through down a unique path as well, and there was quite a wide divergence there. So I don't see that as being physically viable. You brought up an interesting point though about kind of the conspiracy theories and so forth, and I'll always acknowledge that anything is possible, but I'm really not. I'm not much of a proponent when it comes to conspiracy theories, and particularly conspiracy theories that involve the quote-unquote government.
Yeah. Because
our government over here is extremely inept and unable to really do anything correctly or well. And so when you talk about conspiracies that involve cover-ups and people keeping their mouths shut and, particularly over long periods of time, it just doesn't seem to ever happen. At least not with regard to anything else. So why would Bigfoot or UFOs or anything else be the exception,
Yeah, no, I have to go along with that as well. It does sound a bit incredible, doesn't it? But, like you say, I know it's not reported in many cases, but these trailing orbs or these, people see orbs before they see the Bigfoot, or they've got Bigfoot on the property and then these orbs come around. I mean, do you think the two are interconnected, or do you think it's just coincidence that they're in the same place, same time kind of thing?
I think the vast majority of Bigfoot reports, and this would apply also to the Yeti and the Yeren and the Alma, the Yowie, all the different wild men around the world, that we are definitely dealing with relict populations of hominids, man-like forms that from, an earlier time that have basically survived in small numbers, small but viable numbers into the present times. I think that most of the evidence points in that direction. But I think there's most certainly, or at least there seems to be, a fringe section of those of the phenomenon that seems to be more paranormal in nature, and that's when you get into these weird accounts of Bigfoot and UFOs, or floating orbs, tracks that disappear, trackways that disappear in the middle of a field, vanish into thin air, and things like that. I haven't investigated too many sightings like that, but some of my colleagues have, and at least dating back to the 1970s, some really weird Bigfoot sightings from Pennsylvania and other places that at least present that possibility that maybe there is a phenomenon similar to what we're dealing with, the tulpas with the Dogman and Mothman, that portend to these giant, hairy, ape-like creatures as well, these hominid type things. Maybe there are a section of Bigfoot sightings that could relate to tulpas if those things exist.
I mean, I suppose Bigfoot is a strange cryptid in a way, because he does leave evidence. Yeah,
I'm looking at evidence right now on my desktop here. I have probably about a dozen plaster casts of tracks that have been made at different times and in different places across North America, and they share many common attributes that seem to indicate they came from the same species, but they also display different sizes and slight variation, very subtle variations that would indicate diversity within a species. Scientists, some researchers who are much smarter than I am, who are actual physical anthropologists, have studied these footprints extensively, these casts, and have determined that they belong to a totally natural biological foot of an upright, very heavy, very massive biped, a primate, and that the foot structure is very different from humans. And so, there's a lot of information out there if people want to delve into that a bit more. But it's pretty strong evidence, really, and a lot of scientists haven't even wanted to really look at it. But as I said, a few who've been bold enough to kind of stick their neck out there. And if you're interested in Bigfoot, I'm sure you've heard the names, Dr. Jeff Meldrum, Dr. Grover Krantz, and so forth. Yeah. They build a pretty strong case that these casts are, fairly convincing evidence, and it's a shame that more scientists haven't taken a look at them.
I think it's strange that the Bigfoot, his foot is, almost looking more human than it would look, like a gorilla's foot. The toe structure. So,
yeah,
do you think he's some sort of lost relative of ours, or do you think he's just come up from a completely different branch altogether?
Well, I think it's definitely a hominid. If it walks on its two legs, even though it seems to have a very different foot structure and maybe evolved bipedalism in a very different way than we did, I would say it is most definitely a hominid because it walks on its hind legs. People that have seen them up close describe their faces as looking surprisingly human-like, or a mixture of human and ape-like characteristics. It seems that they're very intelligent, which is, I think, the main reason why we haven't found them yet, because they are very aware of us. They have heightened senses and apprehension when it comes to humans, Homo sapiens, and perhaps they view us as their primary competition, competing for the same niche. So they've therefore chosen to live in very remote areas that we don't go, to travel at night when we're mostly not out in the woods, to stay nomadic. All of those things would really be the only way you could explain how they've managed to stay hidden from us, and that's if they are very intelligent and they intend to stay hidden from us. So yes, in that respect, I'd say, and furthermore, if you look at our fossil history, things that looked rather like Bigfoot or Sasquatch did exist. We know definitively did exist hundreds of thousands and even, up to a couple of million or a few million years ago, kind of, quote unquote ape men, kind of characteristics of both, some very primitive characteristics and also, sort of, derivative or modern characteristics combined. So yes, I think that all things point in that direction.
Mm. And the other thing about Bigfoot, again, is he's seen all over the world, in different guises, but, a similar sort of creature. So what?
Yeah, further evidence that they're hominids, because what's the only animal you can find on every continent?
Indeed, yeah. So, what about giants? Is that something you've run across?
My problem with giants, and a lot of these accounts of giants that I've heard about, is that physiologically speaking, because of our design, which we were just kind of talking about a bit there, I don't think you can really increase the size of a humanoid much larger than, say 8 feet tall, without creating a lot of structural issues. The weight of a biped increases, I forget what the ratio is, but increases rather dramatically when you start adding inches in height.
Yeah.
And, look at the tallest human that ever lived, a guy named Robert Wadlow. He was born in Alton, Illinois in the 20th century. He only lived to his early 20s because it got to the point where he couldn't even really walk without leg braces. He couldn't feel his lower extremities, and ultimately he had a foot injury and got an infection because he couldn't move around very well, essentially. So this notion of a humanoid form standing 9, 10, or even 12, 15 feet tall or taller, I just don't think that works from a physiological standpoint. I don't think something that tall would be able to walk around on 2 legs without putting an immense amount of pressure on his or her lower extremities.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, it's the same for spiders, I've been told.
Yeah.
They can only grow to a certain size, otherwise they'd actually suffocate.
Yeah.
They can't move oxygen around, the body efficiently if they get to, any bigger than they do now. So that's
and they also
good if you don't like spiders, I suppose.
And their muscles don't become functional anymore because they're not strong enough to carry their mass.
What's the strangest cryptid then you've been sent to investigate?
Well, there were some pretty weird ones. I hosted a TV show, Missing in Alaska, and we investigated reports of a mermaid-type creature known as the Qualipollock. And it's a Native American legend, an Inuit legend, that essentially describes, very similar to mermaid legends around the world, kind of an fully aquatic creature that combines humanoid characteristics with the lower extremities of a fish or some type of fin. That was a pretty weird. Those were pretty weird stories when we were up there investigating that. Again, Mothman and other flying humanoid accounts that I've investigated are pretty strange when you consider the physical descriptions that people have logged and sketched out. And Dogman, I have investigated a couple of Dogman accounts, and again, all of those are kind of in that same, I put them in kind of the same file folder together, kind of a dossier of really weird creatures. There are some good ones in my new book. My new book, A Menagerie of Mysterious Beasts, I actually dedicated a few accounts in the last chapter too, like the black-eyed children, which probably more of a paranormal phenomenon. It's pretty creepy. Yeah. Mermaids and fairies and I come across those kind of really weird accounts from time to time, but it's not something that I necessarily devote a lot of time and effort into. But I do enjoy reading about them and perhaps filing them away into my little box here.
Cool. So, two questions then. I guess these are the final two questions, but this is which cryptid do you think will be proved, or let's rephrase that, most likely to be proved in our lifetime, say?
Oh, that's a great question. I actually think there's two candidates that are kind of running head to head. One is called the Orang Pendek, or Little Man of Sumatra, which is a diminutive hominid, kind of a Littlefoot type creature that's been reported from the remote regions of Mount Kerinci and some of those other areas in western Sumatra. Sumatra is obviously an island that has yielded a number of animal discoveries in recent years. Some of the richest biodiversity in the world, and there's certainly, I think, there's a possibility that there's some type of either bipedal ape or diminutive hominid living in those remote areas. I haven't unfortunately had the opportunity to go over and do the research myself, but Adam Davis and Richard Freeman and some other colleagues of mine that have been over there are quite convinced that this thing is real. I think the other candidate would be the quote-unquote Tasmanian tiger, or thylacine, the carnivorous marsupial that's been reported from the island of Tasmania and Australia. And, of course, we know that thylacines were native to Tasmania at least until 1936, when the last one died in captivity. But since that time, there have been hundreds of sightings by reputable people in Tasmania, including park rangers and wildlife experts. Their existence in Australia is a little bit harder to accept, although it's possible that some thylacines were taken to mainland Australia from Tasmania before they went extinct, and perhaps they are living in small viable populations there as well. So I think both of those cryptids, either or of those cryptids, may turn out to be the real thing. Maybe, hopefully, within my lifetime.
I hope so. Yeah, I think that one. Yeah, they get enough reports of that one to make you think that there could be something to it. If not that, then there's something that looks very similar out there running around. But okay then. So that's the ones you think might get proved. What about if you could choose one for you to prove? You actually could capture one. Which would that be?
Oh wow. Well, obviously, my focus of my research for many years has been on the flying cryptids, what we talked about earlier, the thunderbirds. I think that obviously finding something like Bigfoot or Sasquatch or the Yeti would, I think, have the greatest impact on human kind in terms of cultural changes. I mean, because we are talking about something that's presumably very close to us. Yeah. Or closer to us than any other animal on the planet. But I think I would love to prove that there is some type of giant flying cryptid out there that is much larger than anything known. I think that would be pretty remarkable, actually, to consider that there's something that has been flying through the air, perhaps for thousands or millions of years, that scientists have not documented. And it's probably, when I explain it like that, it's probably very unlikely. Now, I think about it, because something that would be very large, which is what people are describing, that's flying through the air, you think that there would be a lot more sightings, a lot more photographs and evidence. And we really don't have any physical evidence of these flying creatures at all. No one has come across a giant feather or egg or nest or anything like that, or even a giant pile of bird crap. So, but yeah, I think proving that any of these flying cryptids, well, actually, any of them, I'd take any of them, Lee. Honestly, man.
Well,
At this
I'd
point.
take any, but
I'll take, just to open people's minds. And I think that's one of the most rewarding aspects of being a cryptozoologist or an investigator and researcher of the unknown is, just getting people to open their minds, even just a little teeny bit, and consider the possibility that there are things in this modern world that we don't quite understand yet.
do you think that's arrogance?
Do you think it's arrogance which way?
Like
To
human
be
arrogance that
open-minded?
we know everything about everything.
Oh yeah, that attitude, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, how often now are we proven wrong when it comes to, just think about how much the science books and history books have been rewritten in recent years as things came to light, and old, long-held theories have been overturned by new findings and discoveries. The technology and research and so many things are advancing, DNA research, so many things are advancing these days that, I feel it is very arrogant to presume that we know it all at this point. And I don't judge people that have that attitude, but I just find it hard to understand myself that people could feel, that confident that we do know anything at this point, really.
Yeah. I mean, we've done that. We did that with coelacanth. We did that with the panda, the silverback. We told the locals they don't know what they're talking about. To some extent, the same with Orang Pendek. We're telling the locals who see this thing regular that it can't be possible. I do find that a tad arrogant.
Yeah, and on that, if I can, just a quick follow-up on that, Lee. In the past few weeks, it was announced that a new species of orangutan has been described in Sumatra.
Yeah, was that just based on DNA?
Yeah, it is. So, it perhaps sounds a bit more fabulous when you first say it. But yes, scientists knew about this kind of isolated population of orangutans for a long time.
Yeah.
But through DNA testing, they were finally able to conclusively say that they are genetically distinct, probably diverged about 70,000 years ago from other orangutan species in Sumatra. But, just those kinds of findings, I think, illustrate that point that, I think years ago, if you had asked scientists how many species of orangutans there were, that, they probably would have, said, well, maybe just one or two, but now we're up to 4 that are genetically distinct. And so, it's all part of the process of discovery and exploration.
Absolutely. Well, I hope that something does turn up in the not too distant future, because I think it'd be amazing. But I just want to thank you for your time. I know you're really busy, so it's been great talking to you.
Well, thank you, Lee. It's definitely been an honor talking to you this evening, and hopefully we can do it again real soon.
Yeah, and you just want to tell people where they can find your work, because like you say, you've got plenty of interesting books. There's a book there if you're into cryptozoology. There's a book there for you for sure. So do you want to tell people where you can find them?
Yeah, I appreciate it. I have a website which is kengerhard.com. People can also find me on Facebook, Ken Gerhard Cryptozoologist, and of course, all my books are available online at major book retailers. My newest one is called A Menagerie of Mysterious Beasts, and it's got a pretty diverse range of topics. I think something for everyone. So anyone out there is interested, I would check it out.
Great stuff. Well, thank you again, mate, and I'm sure we'll speak again.
Sounds good, Lee.
Cheers, mate,
Talk to
and have
you
a
soon,
good
man.
Christmas.
Alrighty, sounds good. Cheers.
Well, they've gone. Though just for now. It wasn't the right time for us to meet. But there'll be other nights, other stars for us to watch. They'll be back.
No doubt.
You know, I must tell you the story now. I'm very alien orientated now. My first wife, you know, I was married to my first wife, and I always said to her, I said, listen here, you must know something, and know it now. I said, when the aliens land, I'm going with. Do you understand me? I was serious.
Yeah.
You know, I was dead serious. And the other day, you know, we still friends, you know.
Yeah.
And she said to me, she said, you know what, Vic? She said, you know, when you were so serious about this, she said, you know how worried I was? You know, that I was just going to, that you would just be prepared to leave me, you know, and
I've heard plenty of stories of that happening. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, I said to her.
But mine would be the other way around. If the aliens came, they could take my missus.
Yeah, they could take my wife. Yeah, that'd be better, wouldn't it?
Well, that might be lucky as well, you know. Yeah, but I you know, I said in no uncertain terms, you know. Now my current wife, now she's quite happy with that. She's just got one thing. She said I must come pick her up, because she said if I don't come pick her up and they bring me back, you know, she's gonna definitely, you know, make big trouble for me, you know, when I don't take her. But yes, I've always had an exceptionally contact, you know, with extraterrestrials. You know, I've got no doubt, you know, where they are, and I do understand this dimensional thing. You know, like for instance, I mean, you know, in my life, I get a lot of messages, strange messages. Like, you know, I was one day, you know, watching this whole financial system and stuff like that, and one day, you know, the thought came to me. And I think this is something that the first group of extraterrestrials, you know, enhanced. And I got this thought, and it said, you know what, your planet is run by extraterrestrials, bad extraterrestrials, you know. And this suddenly made sense. And I do believe it. I believe that they were here long before us. And, you know, we are manipulated with the current, you know, political system and the financial system and, you know, the big pharma and stuff like that. That to me just makes sense, you know, that you've got the extraterrestrials and then you've got these 13 families, you know, the Rothschilds and your queen and stuff like that and whatever, the whole lot, you know, and then it branches out and you know, and then there's obviously people underneath him, and there's probably a few thousand people in charge of the entire world. But right on top, I do believe that there's been a negative extraterrestrials, you know, out there, you know, doing this whole thing. But I do also believe that when we as a human race, you know, get our act together and we start loving each other and respecting each other and stuff like that, they won't have a foothold to stand on. Because I do believe that they do, you know, feed on our fear.
Yeah, they do.
And our suffering.
They need that fear. They need that kind of low frequency to survive. Without that low frequency, they can't survive. They'll have to go. They'll have to be kicked out.
Exactly. Yes, you know. And I mean, I'm a very, you know, staunch follower, you know, of, you know, I mean, I only watch, you know, alternative news, you know, and, you know, this pedogate stuff. And I mean, that's all positive things, you know, things are coming out, you know, and then the Vatican and so on and so on, you know. I mean, that to me just makes all sense, you know. Yep.
Yeah, I've always said that the Vatican is a kingpin of the lower astral realms, or the evil, whatever you want to say. It is the kingpin. Take down that. Good night, Vienna. Game over.
Game over. Yes. Yeah.
Game over.
Yeah. I think that and the financial system. I mean, that is just hampering literally everybody. You know. I mean, from the filthy, stinking rich, because you know they've got too much money, and I mean they suffer from overdose and drugs like that because they've got access to that. And crappy aircraft, and they kill themselves in that, and fast cars. And then you get the people on the lower end, you know, the middle people and the lower end. And I mean, they're literally dying of hunger. I mean, you know, because of the whole money system, you know. Yeah. So I believe when
I've
deal
always
with
said,
that,
you know, you've been run by psychopaths. You know, the lunatics run the asylum. You know.
No, yes, no, for sure we are. And you know what? This is the whole contrast, you know, with this whole extraterrestrial thing, is that, and I mean, Dolores Cannon, you know, I mean, I've listened to a lot of it.
Huge fan.
And
huge fan.
Great. And I mean, she says, basically, very little of your alien abductions and alien contact is negative. They're actually rather more positive. I think people, maybe, I think laying on a bed and having a needle stuck through your eye, into your brain, I mean, that's most definitely traumatic, But basically, I have found, in my personal experience, that the extraterrestrials are rather more benevolent, They're rather more good guys.
Yeah.
Well, I've got to say, it's a fascinating story, George, and if...
Thank you. Hey, it's been a fascinating, George. Really,
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anything happens in the future, we'd love to air it.
Yeah,
so.
we'd love to get you back on because you sound,
As I say, when you're ready, just send me the link, and then I can listen to it, and I will rebroadcast it. Yeah, the people are very excited on our radio station as well. And a blessed evening for you.
Okay.
So, great story.
Great story, yeah. Great
chat.
stuff there, yeah. We'll definitely get George Victor on again.
Yeah.
So, definitely.
Like I say, great fellow. Good laugh.
He's the kind of guy you like to just go to a pub with, wouldn't
Yeah,
you?
absolutely.
A few beers, sit there, and yeah.
Especially,
maybe one day.
Especially down in South Africa, it seems pretty warm out there at the moment.
Well, he did say it was pretty hot out there, and he asked us what we was at 6 degrees on it. So
yeah. Terrible, yeah.
Yeah, well.
So that's that then. So the next story is a ghost story.
Yeah, Tyler.
Tyler Bell. And Tyler runs a podcast of his own called West Side Fairy Tales, which he self-narrates his own stories, fairy tales and that, which, some good work gone into them tales. They're pretty good. Good.
He's a good kind of talker as well, isn't he? He's clear.
Yeah, that definitely comes across in his podcast for sure. Yeah. So if you like narrated podcasts, I would go check that out. It's called West Side Fairy Tales, and I'll put a link in the description if you want to find it that way.
He's also ex-Marine, so he don't give a shit anyway. So it's quite a decent one.
Yeah, which is good because he's telling ghost stories from a Marine's perspective, which you don't generally hear, do you? So
he didn't mess about with the stories, did he? Just told us it was.
So
brilliant.
We'll get into that then. Should we play that?
Yeah, okay. Listen to Tyler.
I don't necessarily believe in like ghosts, like John is back from the dead, but I do definitely believe in
the
shaped area. Kind of hang on shit like a scum, like it molds over, and that's very much the place. I'll just jump in. So
go.
2006, we get deployed to Iraq. I was in the infantry, 2nd Battalion, 8th Marine Golf Company, and I don't know where any of this stuff was in relation because I was a grunt and I just did what I was told. Like I was, wake up, go places, go to sleep when they tell you to. Yeah. So eventually they're like, okay, we're going to be going to a place. We're taking you guys off of this post that you're on out in Asakluia, where a town no one's ever heard of. And that's where we lived. And they're like, okay, we're going to take you out of here, and you're going to go do a special detail here for a couple weeks. I'm like, okay, whatever. And then, like, right before we go, they're like, okay, you're going to Abu Ghraib prison. We're like, what, from the fucking news? Are you serious? And they're like, yeah. So we go there, and what it was when the army was there is that it's a fairly large open area. Like, it's almost nothing in the square mile, except for, I think there's either 4 or 6 cell blocks and then a few outbuildings. We didn't go into all of them because the Iraqi army lived in one of them, and then the officers lived in another one with, like, some of the army people that were still left, but there weren't many. And then we lived out in the old guard quarters, which were 4 tiny buildings with, like, broken toilets in the middle of, like, just this flat, sandy area. And where the army was, when they actually had tons of people there, you could still see, like, the marks on the ground, but that was mostly empty now. And then aside from that, it was just silence. I don't know if you've ever been, like, in the desert and heard, like, desert-level silence, but it's very similar to, like, right after a bad snow day, where it's kind of almost like you have mufflers on over your ears. Yeah. And so it was kind of always that. So we're always talking and trying to do stuff because, like, it's eerie when you're not. And then there's also the pervasive kind of constant, like, hey, somebody might climb up on the wall and just, decide to start shooting in here at any given time. So, kind of constant paranoia that comes with being in a war zone. But yeah, so we got there, we got kind of settled, and then after that we didn't have anything to do except for once a day we would go out on patrols and patrol the wall in a truck and go to see all of the posts that the Iraqis were on, and we'd go up and talk to them, ham, pidgin, Arabic, and they would be like, okay, yes, sir, this is fine. All right, thanks, man. And so when we didn't do that, we had a lot of free time, and they try to keep us occupied. I mean, this place is big enough inside that we actually set up a shooting range inside the campus. Yeah. And we would go around, and it's not like weird things started happening, but like we all got like really after each other's throats, and we're trying to do stuff. But I think the first weird thing is definitely when they found Saddam Hussein's torture chambers, which were in there. And they were in, like, it was like D block or E block. And it was a gross looking 2-story building. And everything here is shades of brown. So it's like light brown sand, slightly darker brown buildings. And then this place was like a dingy, dark brown, and no one went to it. And birds wouldn't land on the fucking thing. And they didn't let me go in because I was on post, so like they just snuck off. So it's basically what they called it Scooby-Doo ops, and it was just other higher-ranking guys from my team that had been in like a year or two longer than me. They would just leave in the middle of the day and go sneak around and look at the shit. And they're like, yeah, that place is fucking no good. And we're like, okay, yeah, fine. And we were joking about that shit, like, yeah, this place is probably fucking haunted. And then, like, stuff only got, like, a little weirder and weirder after that. So, we went to one of the cell blocks, right? And they're, okay, we're going to do a room clearing exercise on this entire giant building, because you'll never have an opportunity like this. So we take all of our magazines out of our guns, and we're completely, not unarmed, but our guns don't have any bullets in them, and our magazines are, like, secured so that no one loads one. And we're going to pretend, basically, that this place is full of enemies, run around, and clear it out. Okay. So, there's a bunch of us in here, and somebody starts throwing smoke as grenades, which is part of the plan. But the building is small and kind of claustrophobic, and the smoke fills everything up to the point where you can barely see, and it's actually almost giving you, like, a little bit of trouble breathing just because the particulates are so thick. And me and my buddy, Kuchenmeister, who I'm going to call Cooch for the rest of this because his name's too long, that's what we called him when we were in. And we're on one part, and it's like, okay, everybody, we're clearing up, and you can barely see anybody. So it's just shadows, like 6 or 7 feet away from you, and then you kind of just fade back into the fog. And there's someone down the hall from us, and we're like, hey man, you're past the exercise point. Come on, let's go. We're clearing in because they're giving us the circle up sign, which is like, hey, everybody, get in here. And the guy wouldn't respond. And we're like, dude, stop being a fucking dick. And we were saying it was, I think, Nelson that was with us. And we're like, dude, come on, let's go. And he just didn't. And we couldn't see him. And it was, like, really dark. And then we moved back. And like, hey, do you guys, like, is Nelson here? And Nelson was like, over there. He's like, dude, dumbasses, like, I've been here. What took you guys so long? We're fucking waiting for you. What are you talking about? And he's like, dude, I've been here the whole time. And our squad was completely up. We were the last two in. We're like, dude, there's somebody still in there. And they're like, no, there's not. And then we went in and tried to find whoever was still in there because we figured maybe it was like one of the Iraqis like got lost or something, but none of them were off post. Everybody was good, but there was somebody still in that damn building, like moving around. And I guess to speak more to the atmosphere of this place, all these buildings are huge and empty and no glass or anything, so wind is constantly blowing through them, except for, of course, this one. And it's making like these, sounds in the walls. And randomly, these giant, probably 250-pound steel doors that they had, the old bar, like, prison doors, would slam shut at random intervals during the day. And you could hear them even when you're outside of the building. Even if you're like a quarter mile away on the other side of the base, you just hear ka-chow, chow, like one of them slamming shut. And this is constant the entire time we're here. Even when we're on this op, running around inside this thing, you hear, boosh, 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 and then like nothing for like 15 minutes, and boosh. And so,
wind ain't gonna do that, is it?
No.
No. It can't, there's nothing for it to catch.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that was definitely one of the weirdest ones. And, there was another one. We were walking through one of the cell blocks, probably northeast of the one of where we lived, and it's a very large open building. And then when you get into where the officers and stuff hung out, and like the I guess maybe it's like a mess area or where they prayed, those are kind of big. But then once you get into the cell blocks, they're like I think 2 or 3 stories, and fairly small cells. I mean, they're the size of, I don't know if you've ever been into like an apartment that has like a nice walk-in closet, and you're like, that's surprisingly big for a closet. That's as big as the biggest cell is, and they have like racks in them, and then like what do you call it? A cabinet, not like a full-size storage thing, but like little tiny metal cabinets. And I don't know if those were put in afterwards or whatever, but they say like during the time, those, when it was in use for Saddam, those would be 7 deep, people 7 deep in there. And I mean, they're covered in graffiti, like just clawed into the wall. There's stuff on the walls that's, you're like, okay, that's definitely from like maybe like a tar pencil or something. Don't know what that is. I hope that's not like dried shit or blood. Just, stuff smeared on it. And it's not like it's like, some Blumhouse horror story, like nightmare shit. It's just like a little bit here and there. You're like, this is gross. And, we'd mess around with each other like, hey man, I'm going to lock you in the cell. I think somebody might have gotten locked in one of the cells, which I'm glad it wasn't me. But we were walking down one of these, doing another like patrol thing, kind of looking around. And these cell blocks are seriously like 200-300 meters long, like fairly long, skinny hallway. And for whatever reason, we're walking through here, and there is a bouncy ball the size of my fist. Like, well, maybe half the size of my fist. But you know what I'm talking about? One of those rocket balls you can throw and it'll bounce off. Yeah. It's on the ground. And we're like, what in the fuck is this doing here? And Mercado, who's with me, you don't really need to know his name, but yeah, Mercado kicks this thing down the hall, right? And as soon as he kicks it, we were watching it go up. Literally, like, there's nowhere else to look. It's just 3 of us walking down this hallway. He kicks it up the hallway, it vanishes, and then rolls back up from behind us in a second. And we're like, dude, did that just bounce up from there? And he's like, no. I'm like, did you see that? Like, yeah. And then, hand to God, 3 full-grown Marines wearing flak jackets, helmets, fully loaded down with M16A4 assault rifles, sprinted out of that motherfucker so goddamn fast, dude. We came up on some of the other guys who were like, what happened? We're like, nothing. We just ran away from a bouncy ball.
So you actually saw it vanish?
It like rolled into like the distance. You know what I'm saying? Where like kind of can't see it anymore.
Went into the dark and then just reappeared behind you like ET shit.
Yeah. And like it didn't bounce off anything. It would have had to come right down past us. What in the fuck just happened? Yeah. Very strange. I don't know. Like,
did you ever see that ball again?
No, we didn't go back to that area again. We fucking avoided that shit like the plague. And still, the whole time all of this is happening, just a constant, just the sound of the wind just howling through these places and doors. Even while that's happening, like, it never stopped. It's almost like hard to tell a story about it because you don't get the full effect of just
how creepy it is.
Yeah. And yeah, when we finally got out of there, it was like everybody was very, very, very happy about it. And
what was the lighting situation in this building?
Natural light only.
Okay, yeah.
So when we went out at night, basically, if you had to do anything, even if you had to use the head, we had a Surefire. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's a light that attaches to your rifle, which is fairly bright, but you can take it off. And we'd walk around with those. And walking around in those prisons with those things is, like, not ideal. Like, there's a reason you have those big spreads on normal flashlights so you can see. And these are, like, almost like horror movie style. You can only see exactly what you're pointing at.
Yeah. More like a laser than a...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Basically, it's more designed to illuminate whatever you're shooting at and blind them than it is to actually, like, light up a big area.
Fuck.
Yeah. Where was the most, in your experience then, Tyler, where's the most oppressive, in, you know, the atmosphere, what you felt, what was the most oppressive area in that place?
Oh, by far it was the D block area, or I can't remember exactly what we called it, but it was where the executions stuff and the torture chambers were. And, you know, no one was allowed to go over there. It was actually like we were prohibited from going over there. We also like weren't allowed to like use cameras or anything. You're kind of generally not supposed to do that when you're in Iraq. But like we actually had one of our staff sergeants came by and confiscated every single camera that he found, and like, you know, the chips and stuff and deleted stuff. So I took some pictures while I was there, and I got in trouble for it when he found my camera. But yeah, no, that place was, we're not allowed to go there, and like you could see it, like it just had its own like vibe. And like there's birds everywhere in Iraq. You might not expect it, but there's these tiny little finch things, and like there's ravens sometimes, like rooks or whatever, and none of them would go near this place. They wouldn't land anywhere near it. Everywhere else on the base they were fine, but they wouldn't go near that motherfucker.
What was the reason given as to why you couldn't go over there?
I think because of what it was. The Iraqis obviously were on the base still too. And like I said, this place has a history and, you know, cultural relationship with the populace. So, you know,
so it's almost like turning a blind eye kind of thing.
Yeah, and the Marines is always like redundancy as far as, you know, keeping people safe. So it's like, all right, the Army already fucked up here. The last thing we need to do is have some jackass Lance Corporal go in and try to pull off a hunk of, I don't know, Uday Hussein's pneumatic guillotine thing.
Right, I'm just going to open this beer.
Yeah.
It's got a widget in it.
It's got a widget in it.
Not fine.
Oh, bollocks. I don't know if you have them in the States, do you?
What is that?
A widget.
I've heard the term widget before, for computers.
You get it in draft beer, draft ales. It just stops it being too fizzy. It's like a little ball. It's just basically a ball, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just stop
yeah, like in a Guinness.
Yeah, that's what I'm drinking. Yeah, Guinness. Yeah. But okay, so that's done. I didn't want that to be, you know, I've been waiting for you to pause. I didn't want to, you know, spoil the moment. But
no, go ahead.
So everybody that was stationed there, do you get the feeling that everybody that was stationed... I know because some guys don't like talking about this kind of stuff, especially if it creeps them out and all the rest of it, but did you get the feeling that everybody that was stationed there felt the same way?
Everybody thought Abu G was weird as shit, at least.
Yeah.
And if not, like, haunted. I kind of only talked to my, like, team, obviously, because we were always rolling around together. But, yeah, everyone's like, this place is fucking weird. Like, no one was not happy to leave when we finally left there to go back to sitting on a bridge that got mortared and stuff all the time. They're like, all right, I'm done with Abu Ghraib. Take me back to the fucking firefights.
So did anything else happen there then?
No, it's a strange place. Holes in walls make no sense. Like a big 3-foot diameter hole through a 1.5-foot thick concrete prison wall. I'm like, why is this here? It's constant weirdness. Yeah, but other than that, no, just the stuff we heard about. Like the Iraqi national football team used to play there. I don't know if you know about them, but they have kind of a spurious legacy. Do you know who Uday Hussein is?
The son?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Psycho.
Yeah.
Well-known nut job. he oversaw them because he's a huge soccer fan. And obviously every time they played outside of Iraq, people would try to run for it. And when they lost, he would get butthurt about it and break people's arms and legs and throw them into a drowning pool that was apparently at Abu G. I think that was in the D block area. But they practiced there too. Their practice fields were inside of the prison. Which
not want to play for that team, would you?
No, wouldn't.
Imagine the need to win.
I know, yeah. You'd be giving bribes, wouldn't you? Just to let us win, for fuck's sake.
Yeah. I would like the goalkeeper. Letting goals. I bet it's a different goalkeeper
every game. Yeah, like Spinal Tap's drummer.
Yeah.
Right, literally exploded too.
Absolutely, yeah.
Fucking hell. But so, as for the place itself, then, because obviously you hear stories coming out of Iraq itself. I mean, was there anything else that you heard about from your forces out there?
Like our people, not too much. I know even some of the people that we took over for were like, yeah, the place is no good. Like, you know, hearing stuff in the middle of the night, like seeing people like walking around, you know, shapes and stuff. And we probably saw some stuff like that too. And we just thought it was, you know, people. You never know. It's just already a weird enough situation being in a war zone and having people kind of being in the free for all that is, that it's hard to get context to say like, oh, this is actually that sort of weirdness.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah,
just
the
Iraqis. You know, so I had a mate that was out in Afghanistan, and he came back with stories of you know, the Bigfoots that they'd seen out there, the Americans had seen up on the hills. There was one night where he. Should I tell this story? I might as well tell the story. There was one night where they were travelling somewhere in Afghanistan. And they held up on the night just in this, basically a desert. And it was flanked by some mountain range. And there'd been rumours that there'd been snipers on these particular mountains, okay? So they circled the wagons, as you do, and they... and there was, you know, he was a truck driver at the time. And they were sleeping in the back. In the middle of the night, he wakes up and he can hear this chanting, you know, like, you know, the usual sort of chant, you know, like the, yo, man, you mob. And he's thinking, what the fuck is that? And he said at first he thought he was dreaming, you know, because of the situation and the paranoia, like I say, and all the rest of it. And then he sort of woke up a bit more, and eventually he was wide awake, and he could still hear this chanting going on. Then he jumps out of the wagon, comes back round the side, looks in the back, and his mate's sleeping bag's there, and his mate's not there. He was sleeping in the back of the wagon. And he can still hear this chanting going on. So he follows, he picks up his rifle and goes out, follows this chanting. And eventually he comes to his mate sitting on the ground, cross-legged, and he walks in front of him and he says, what are you doing, you silly bastard? You know what I mean? And he's just sitting there, and he walks in front of him and his eyes were shut. And he stood looking at him and he's talking to him, and the guy's just completely oblivious that he's there. And he said the weird thing was, well, I mean, that was weird anyway, but he said the weirder thing was that this guy was just stacking rocks in a pyramid in front of him, just little pebbles, like a big pebble, then a smaller pebble, in a pyramid shape, and then dismantling it and then doing it again, just sitting there cross-legged doing that with his eyes closed and chanting. And anyway, you're not supposed to wake people, are you, if they're sleepwalking? But he did, you know what I mean, because of the situation and where there was. He woke him up, because obviously there was off the path as well, so you've got IEDs and all the rest of it. So he's just wandering in this rock field, basically. Yeah. So he wakes him up, and he said, what the fuck am I doing out here? And he said, I don't know, I was hoping you was going to tell me. Anyway, drags him back to the truck, and he said they sat in the cab and was talking about what had just happened. The lights were off, for obvious reasons, and at that point they saw like flickering lights on the hillside. And this hill was about probably a half mile away from the road, but they could see these flickering lights, and straight away he's a bit worried, you know what I mean, because they had the rumours that there was meant to be people, surgeons, hid up in these hills. Anyway, they see these flickering lights, and nothing happened. Next morning, he tells the guy in command, and they log it in a book. When they get back to wherever they was going, this base, they logged it in this book, and he flipped through this book, and he'd seen there'd been 5 or 6 reports of exactly the same thing taking place in exactly the same area up on this hillside, and they'd sent people up, they'd sent helicopters up and all sorts of stuff up on this hillside, and they haven't found nobody up there, but just these weird blue flickering lights.
There you go. Weird shit, mate.
You know?
Yeah. Shit gets weird at night on post. And it's like one of those things you don't know if you're tripping out or if maybe it's something. My buddy Ledford, I'll give you guys another one if you don't mind. This isn't Abu Ghraib, but he was in a bad area where they lost a few guys and they were in constant firefights basically the entire time that we were deployed. And he was on post one night on a truck. So basically they had a temporary setup, and he was on a 7-ton truck, which is like a semi-truck sort of, that's got a fixed back. You've probably seen. They're the large green ones. And this one had a turret top. So basically where the driver is, there's a hole in the top, and they had a turret on there, which is not super common for 7 tons. And he was on there with a machine gun, and it was like probably 2 or 3 in the morning, he said. And he is not the kind of guy to, like, even deal with this shit. You know, he's like, I'm not into paranormal stuff. And he's like, dude, I was sitting there, and like 15, 20 yards from me, like, I see a black ball on the ground, and it starts getting bigger, and all the shadows start coming up to it. And he said it built up like a wax candle melting in reverse, and it was a very large thing, and it got bigger and bigger until it was almost the size of the truck, and then it started shifting toward him in the night. He's like, I couldn't see through it. He's like, I was awake, I was like pinching myself and slapping myself, and this thing is just moving straight toward me. He's like, I thought I was asleep or I was losing my mind, and then eventually I just flipped on all the lights, because he had like a big light on the gun, and the thing like poofed away around where the light was and went away. And he's like, dude, I thought I was going to die, and I have no idea why. He's like, it couldn't have been real. It couldn't have been real. But he's like, I was fucking terrified. Yeah. So who knows, man? If it's Warzone.
Yeah.
I bet everybody's got a million stories like that, but you don't know whether or not to attribute it to something like paranormal stuff or just being crazy paranoid because of where you are.
Yeah, it's fair enough. But it just, you know, especially in this situation and all the rest of it, and the guys that we're talking about, I wonder how much of this stuff is ever expressed. You know, I think a lot of people take this stuff to the grave of them.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
They'll end up being thinking they're loonies or something,
yeah.
you know.
Well, there's always that element of ridicule, isn't there?
Yeah, of course there is, yeah.
But,
especially in the Marines, you know, everybody's going once to admit anything.
But, well, we should say thank you very much for your service.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tyler. It's been fantastic.
Thanks for your support.
You know, it's guys like you that keep us safe. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's been a pleasure talking to you. And do you want to tell people about your podcast while you're here?
Yeah, sure, if you don't mind. West Side Fairy Tales podcast. I read and write stories. I write stories and I read them. It's the first Friday of every month, and they're about 30 to 45 minutes long. You can find out more at Westside iTunes, bit.ly.com/Westside iTunes, or just westsidefairytales.com.
Yeah, fair enough. I found it. If you like, you know, narrated stories, it's a podcast for you, because, like you say, great narration, great voice.
Thank you.
Great stories.
Yep.
And
thanks, Tyler.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys.
Okay, so
see what whatever you heard on the show today, you know, just let us know. Email us, or on the Hangout, or just let us know what you thought.
So it's email is dbtopodcast@gmail.com. Obviously, you can visit the website. That's just don'tbreaktheoathpodcast.com, or you can find us on Facebook. Just type "Don't Break the Oath Podcast."
Yeah,
Paranormal Hangout, and you find us easy. You can either direct message me or Andy.
Yep.
It's not a problem. If you've got a story to share, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, and please keep sending the reviews. Please, they're really definitely very important to us.
But I think that story from Randy about the ball, that would be really creepy, wouldn't it?
What's that? Oh, the ball. Yeah. That was like, what was that film with Jack Nicholson? What was that one, Lee? It's that strange house, wasn't it? He ended up going nuts.
What,
There's a little ball there.
The Shining, yeah.
Was it Shining?
Yeah.
There's kind of a football there that kept coming, someone kicked it and then it kept coming back or something down the stairs and that. Something like that, wasn't it? But of course, Tyler was actually, this is, I mean, you got 4 or 5 Marines, and, to run out of a building, it must have spoken to him really
absolutely,
bad.
Yeah. I mean, just the place itself would creep me out anyway,
I would
Not to mention being in a war zone as well.
Yeah, obviously Tyler said that they couldn't go in one part, obviously, because it's the really bad shit one in there. But it would have been kind of cool to say, I looked in it and this was in it, but obviously he only speculated what was in that building.
Yeah, I don't think psychics would want to go in that building.
No, I don't think I would have gone in either. I wouldn't have gone in there.
But
I even said birds won't even land on that part. There's thousands of birds
that's
nesting everywhere, but that place they keep away from.
That's when that
tells you something, doesn't it?
No, it's bad shit. There,
bad shit, definitely, yeah.
But right, so that's it for this week then.
Yeah.
Next week's going to be slightly different, but we won't give too much away here.
No, have to wait and find out.
Indeed, you'll either love it or hate it. I think.
Well,
it's strange, whichever way you square it. So.
Yeah.
Until next week, have a great week.
Yeah, have a great week.
And like say, reviews if you can. Yep. If not, just come and say hello on Facebook.
Yep,
we'd love to chat with anybody. So thank you very much. So see you next week.
Bye now.
Well, they've gone. No, just for now. It wasn't the right time for us to meet. But there'll be other nights, other stars for us to watch. They'll be back.